reached out and asked if you had read the indictment. You said you read it word for word, page for page, right?
I did. I keep up. I love Jackson.
Even though they've not been in court and they've not been found guilty, it's just an indictment.
They don't see it. My first statement was, think of your family. Think about your family. Put your family first.
I never thought in a million years we would have been put in the situation that we were in. Never. Because we went through our whole career doing the right thing.
It's utterly ridiculous to me. Utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of the Othor Cain Show. Glad to have you aboard tonight. I know others are coming in even as we speak. Seems like it's been a minute since we've been here at our normal 8 o'clock hour, right? But we are glad to be here. We've been following a story about the state auditor and his releasing of information about nonprofits, particularly Black nonprofits. And we've been digging and we've been searching, and I am extremely excited to say coming up in the next week or so, we will have the three heads of those nonprofits that the auditor lifted. We will have them in one room talking about their work and all the great things that they do for Hinds County, Jackson, the state of Mississippi, at large. And so I'm extremely excited about that. And I certainly hope that you will be around. Today, though, we're going to turn our attention to crime victims. There's a reporter at Mississippi Today that has covered crime victims and funding and violence and social justice. He covers all of these issues for Mississippi Today. And he's made some interesting connections, I will say that. He's made some very, very interesting connections, connecting funding for crime victims and how it's funneled and how it's approved and all those kinds of things. And so tonight I want to turn our attention to that. Now, I will butcher his last name, so I won't even attempt to share his last name. I'll give him an opportunity to do that. He is an excellent writer. I was when his articles were first shared with me, I read it and I read it again. I was like, man, he's an excellent writer. He left no stones unturned, and I can absolutely always appreciate a reporter who goes beyond the headlines and really digs to give you all sides and to really tell a complete and compelling story. And that's what Leo has done. He is, again, a reporter with Mississippi Today. We're going to invite him into the stream, and we're going to give him an opportunity to tell you his last name because I don't want to butcher it. Leo,
yeah,
how are you?
I mean, I used to be a teacher before I was a reporter, and I was just Mr. B because none of my students, none of the faculty, no one could pronounce it. It's Bevilacqua. It's Italian. It's, again, I still, even to this day, when I go to the supermarket and I see some of my former students, it's Mr. B. I mean, no one knows my last name, so it's all right. I get it. I
get it though, man. My nieces and nephews, until they get older, they're not able to pronounce my first name. So I'm always Uncle O while they're young, and then when they age, they finally get it. So I totally understand.
No, I don't mind it at all.
Got it. So listen, I am really glad that you are here. Like I said, I've been following the auditor and his coverage, his reports of these nonprofits. And when a friend connected me with your writings and your information, I was like, oh man, I'm really happy to connect with someone who can tell a story from a different angle. So let's just start with your background first. I did read that you were a teacher prior to becoming a reporter. Tell us a little bit, and you spent a lot of time in the Delta. Did you teach in the Delta?
Yeah, I did. I taught in Indianola, Leland, Jackson, which is actually where a lot of I said in my bio on the Mississippi 2A website, where a lot of the story ideas came from, from concerns from neighbors, parents, and students, and faculty. You know, the Delta is a rural place, but it has, problems that are bigger um, than small towns. And definitely being a teacher, you do see, education system, but also the criminal justice system work. I write a lot about juvenile justice. It's something that I feel isn't written about a lot and not in depth. And that's kind of what led me down this road to write about crime victim compensation. It wouldn't surprise you to know that a lot of the first people I talked to when I was trying to figure out what this meant were actually funeral home owners, because this is something that they are actually really familiar with. And basically, the system is that back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan was actually the one who decided to put together a task force because he was seeing that crime victims, that is, people who are the victims of crime, who are murdered, were being mistreated in the criminal justice system. Oftentimes, they were treated as uh, criminals themselves. And what he did was he put together this fund called the Crime Victim Fund that basically helps families pay for funerals. If they're a victim of a pretty horrible assault, pay for medical expenses, pay for counseling, um, crime scene cleanup, a lot of important things that crime victims have to worry about, not just when the news crews show up on that first day when it happens, but in the days, weeks, and months to follow. And this fund really helps out a lot of crime victims who are low income. Burials are still expensive. One of the things that when I first put out the article, I heard a lot about was people telling me, oh, well, a lot of these people overspend on funerals. Well, if you're living in a rural county and you have one funeral home, you have to go with that funeral home. And when you're in grief, you're not exactly in the mood to barter and bargain and get the price down. And oftentimes you're not in the right state of mind to be making decisions that are financially, sound.
Absolutely.
So this
Let,
is,
let me, let me jump in for a second, because I do want to get a little more in depth in terms of where the funding comes from. But I want to go to your I want to talk a little bit about your article and how you started this process. So, and then I'll say this too first. I do want to get you back on so we can go deeper in this juvenile justice space because I agree with you 100%. Those stories are not told enough and they're not told accurately. I would say, um, but 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 when you were turned on, or your direction was turned towards victims and crime and the compensation. I thank you for that history of Ronald Reagan. But when you were turned or pointed in this direction, what was the first thing that you noticed in terms of funding? Just that they weren't getting a fair share, or the process itself in terms of actually being able to pull the money down?
yeah. So I was hearing from, I had, unfortunately, I had students who were the victims of gun violence, several, and I stayed in touch with their parents, and they were just telling me how hard it was to afford the funeral. One of them showed me a receipt, and it was a lot of money. And they apply for this fund to help offset the cost, and in some cases, they weren't getting it. Um, and when I asked them why they didn't qualify for this fund, they would tell me, "Oh, there's a reason that you could get denied it in Mississippi called contributory misconduct, which is basically another word for you contributed to your own death,
Yeah.
and therefore you are not eligible to collect on the fund." Another reason Mississippi is unique, along with Louisiana, Florida, and used to be Ohio, that if you have a prior felony or a family member who applies for the fund on your behalf has a prior felony, you can be denied. Most states, the felony has to be pretty serious, but in Mississippi, it could be any felony for anything. It could be a victimless crime. It could be a less serious felony. But again, this is not something that most states do. This is just a handful, like 4 at this point, including Mississippi. And the reason it's such a big problem is that gun violence in Mississippi, the gun homicide rate is the highest, especially for young kids. The gun homicide rate skyrocketed from 2013 to 2022 amongst young people, those teenagers specifically. And you see that when I kind of looked at some of the data on who's applying for this fund, the amount of kids under 23 who were either someone was applying on their behalf or they were applying themselves for this fund went up about 4 percentage points just in 3 years, which demonstrates that there is a demand for this fund and that there are a lot of young crime victims in Mississippi specifically, gun homicide.
Where is this fund housed?
This fund is in the Attorney General's office. So the Attorney General's office makes the decision if you qualify for the fund. But the way it operates is a little complicated. Basically, what happens is if you're a victim of crime, obviously the first thing that happens is the police are called at some point and they come to the scene and they do their report. Those police are actually the ones who also determine if you're an innocent victim. So a form is sent to them in about a week after, or a couple weeks after the crime is committed. And they fill out whether you're an innocent victim or not in that time. And that form is sent to the AG's office, and the AG uses that form to make a determination whether you qualify for this fund. Again, the police aspect of it is not well known, but it is a big part of how eligibility is determined.
Now, these monies, though, the fund itself, those monies, that's not taxpayer money, right?
No, it's actually every time you pay a ticket for most crimes, small and large, a portion of that goes to this fund. So if you are convicted of a crime, you have to pay some sort of fine to the court. That's where that money comes from. But as we discussed over the phone recently, a bunch of that money actually has been carved out, at least in Mississippi, for a different fund called the Human Trafficking Fund. Basically, the Human Trafficking Fund was created in 2021 by Attorney General Lynn Fitch. A big project of her administration has been combating human trafficking. So this fund now, if you're convicted for a number of different felonies, that money that used to go to the Crime Victim Fund, which again is money that goes directly to victims to help pay for funerals, hospital visits, just emergency care. That money goes to this other fund, which is basically going to nonprofits across the state. And again, these nonprofits are, at least in the past year, according to who got the money, are primarily on the Gulf Coast, central Mississippi area. And again, I'm not saying
Rankin County, but also in areas that I guess it would be safe to say that those areas don't see a lot of gun violence in those areas, and it's also safe to say that the Black population there, in terms of representation, is low. Right?
Yeah. Well, yes, you don't see a lot of this money going to Black-led nonprofits or in nonprofits in the Delta, for example. There's no nonprofits in the Delta that get this money. This money is made up of a board that is chosen by the Attorney General's office, and it's a board of 5 people. It operates very differently than the board that there really actually isn't a board for the Crime Victim Fund. The Crime Victim Fund is operated by a single person, a director, who makes these decisions herself, along with basically makes these decisions along with a case manager or two, pretty much.
So in essence, you're saying that the Crime Victims Fund, maybe one somebody is there, but the human trafficking piece, there's probably oversight of 5 or 6 people, right?
Yeah, so they're operated very differently. One fund is, has 5 people on it. One has just one person who makes all the decisions for the entire state. So it just they one is a little bit more organized than the other, just in terms of how many people are just going through these cases.
Right. But the money for the crime victims is somehow going to human trafficking, which in my mind are two totally different things, right?
Yeah,
And the human trafficking piece also gets money from the capital. So I want you to connect the two funds in terms of when one becomes taxpayer money that goes to a nonprofit.
yeah. So the human trafficking fund, until this year, it got vetoed by the governor, got over $2 million from the legislature, which is taxpayer money. It's from the general fund, and basically that's different than the crime victim fund, which is all money from, again, court fines and fees, um, and and I mean, it's a big caseload for one person. It's a big caseload to go through all these cases where you have to determine if someone was responsible for their own death. Like, for example, I think the point was really well illustrated by one woman I interviewed in my second story, who was the victim of a horrible domestic violence incident that left her almost blind. And she applied to this fund. She did not have over $12,000 to pay for, medical bills to help regain her eyesight. So she applied for this fund, and was denied because about 8 years ago she was convicted for having drugs. And again, when she was denied, her abuser, who went up to court, was forced to pay money into the human trafficking fund before he could finish paying money into the crime victim fund and pay her restitution. So again, for a while, this human trafficking fund was keeping some offenders from paying into not just the crime victim fund, but for completing paying restitution to some of these crime victims, which again doesn't help victims writ large, victims of crime. So yeah, that was just one place that I found that, having these two funds maybe didn't help. And in some
Got it.
cases, I've talked to some of the people who got some of these funds to help human trafficking victims, and at least one nonprofit told me, I wish I could use some of this money to help domestic violence victims too, because that's, at least where I'm situated, that's also a big problem. But again, that money is earmarked just for human trafficking. So I, as a nonprofit, this person told me, can't just use it for anything.
That's very interesting because some of the nonprofits, on the coast and in these other areas that the AG's office is sending money to, they offer nothing more than referral services, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Some of them, have more intensive services, but sometimes they offer referrals, which is, again, referring you to a medical professional, which is something that, a lot of clinics already do. Again, it is all outlined in an audit letter that the Human Trafficking Fund has to produce every year to the auditor. So anyone could look that up on the AG's website. But, to your point, yeah, I mean, when you're forced to only help one type of victim, when there's all these other victims who fall under a different category, I mean, it's not efficient, in terms of, again, like we talked about, having 5 people on one fund versus one person on all these on just that other fund. Yeah.
And even with that one person being on the other fund, I know that's a large workload, but I also believe that the intent of really helping is not really there, right? Even with that one person doing it, it's a tough, hard, long workload, right? It's big, it's
Yeah.
incredible. I don't know that the intent of really servicing these people are there even with the one person.
Yeah. The denial rates in Mississippi are high. I mean, the denial rate, especially for contributory misconduct, is in the top 10 in the country. It
And
denies.
that's so subjective, right? That's so very
Yeah,
subjective.
it is. And Mississippi's law, the wording in the law it includes a lot of behavior. For example, one mother I spoke to was denied, and in the reason for the denial, which went to a hearing, they said he should have known that where he was heading, there was people who meant him harm, and that his behavior wasn't prudent, and that he didn't anticipate what would happen. Again, this is very subjective language. And
Yeah.
again, this is someone who lost a son to gun violence. And the letter is basically telling them that because their son didn't behave, or he used fighting words. In one case, it was a mother who was denied because her son used fighting words, which apparently makes you not an innocent victim in the eyes, at least, of the Attorney General's office in Mississippi, and denies you money that could help pay for a funeral. And again, this, like you said, it's
And we all
subjective.
know how expensive funerals are, man. They can become quite expensive. And to your earlier point, if you're in a small town with really only one funeral home, what choice do you have?
Yeah, you're really limited in terms of what you can choose. And even if you go for cremation, that still can be a couple $1,000s. Again, if you're pretty isolated out there in a rural area, crematoriums are not just readily available. I know that it's kind of morbid to talk about, but it is the reality of having to plan for these things when you're a crime victim. These are conversations you need to be having the day after, if not the day of.
Yeah, let me read a text that I just got and get you to respond to that. A friend said, my grandson is a recipient of this fund. Haven't got the check yet, but the AG's office does have to approve it after they determine eligibility. He was shot in the face in March after dropping someone off at a house he didn't know, but someone with him did. Opened fire on him when he stepped out of the car. If you have insurance, that has to be paid first, and they will pay what's left up to a certain amount. And then she goes on to say, wish I'd known you were talking about this tonight earlier. We have a little unwanted firsthand knowledge of the situation. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, there are people who do get the fund, and again, it is subjective. So certain counties you see higher denial rates, like DeSoto County had the highest denial rate that I saw for this fund. Some counties do better than others in terms of approving these claims. And again, it depends on law enforcement, because law enforcement in whatever community you're in are the ones making the first determination. There's literally a box on a form that says, did this person contribute to their death, yes or no? And again, that's up to the discretion of the law enforcement officer on duty at that moment.
Right.
And they're making this decision within weeks, sometimes before they know the full facts. So yeah, this is subjective, and obviously there are people who do get it, and it's a good thing that they get it, because again, this is a vital service.
So this may be an unfair question to you, and if you can't answer it, I totally get it. Because I know as a reporter, you don't like to insert your own opinion, in the space of telling the story. But I guess my question, though, is: do you think it is prudent for crime victims' money, that fund, that money, to be transferred to this human trafficking fund and then funneled out to nonprofits. Do you think that's prudent?
I think that it's an important discussion to be had about, doing direct support versus going through a nonprofit, because it seems, just looking within this part, that they prefer to give money to nonprofits than to give money directly to people in their time of need. At least just looking at the budget again, how much they're budgeting for money for direct payments for medical bills, for funerals, versus money going to, again, nonprofits, where it is a lot of money. It's sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. Again, there are some accountability metrics when it comes to the human trafficking fund. They ask, how many people did you help that year? What services do you offer? But again, with the crime victim fund, I was really unable to get a definitive number for how much money is in the fund. It was very difficult even to get denial rates for counties. There is a exemption to the public records law when it comes to this fund, which means that basically I couldn't just ask for all the denial letters, with the names redacted and all that, like I would be able to in other states. I had a colleague who did the same, kind of a similar report in Ohio, Florida, Louisiana, was able to get those denial letters back in those states, but in Mississippi they said no. It's just a different rule, which makes it harder for people who just want to know the truth about how many people are being denied, why they're being denied. Is there any patterns to these denials? One thing I asked, is if there's a racial pattern to this. Are you denying a disproportionate amount of Black applicants? Which was what popped up when the Associated Press did this report. They pulled these applications from a number of states, I think from 23, and found that there was a racial bias on the part of the people who administer this fund. Again, I did that in Mississippi. Was told basically through a peer report that goes to the legislature that they just don't know. They don't know because they don't track race. But the truth of the matter is that if you have the claim number, you should be able to pull the application and the denial letter and figure that out that way. So again, I don't know that that's true, that they don't track that, because again, using that claim number, you could pull both.
But it's easily trackable, right?
Yeah. And again, 22, 23, somewhere around that range of states were able to provide that data, but Mississippi's AG was not able to do that. And again, I wasn't requesting that. It was a sitting member of the legislature who asked for that information.
Wow.
Because again, they have the right to know. They're the ones writing the laws, and ensuring that state agencies are accountable to the people and are operating, are functional.
Right. Well, I absolutely think that this is an opportunity for Shad White to look at some of these nonprofits that are getting this human trafficking money, because that's money coming from the state legislature, that is taxpayers' money, in addition to the other funding that they are getting. Let's talk some specific data in Hinds County, if you will. What are your findings there? Do you have supporting documents that you sent to show us in Hinds County specifically?
Yeah, I mean, Hinds County actually, approved quite a few applications. I would say their denial rate wasn't very high. I would say the denial rates were pretty high in where Tupelo is in Lee County. And if you'll see on the map, Rankin County had a pretty high denial rate. Again, it really varied based on local law enforcement. But Rankin, DeSoto, Lee County, where Tupelo was, were some places where I saw pretty high denial rates. The Gulf Coast area had some counties that had pretty high denial rates as well.
What's the comparison to denial rates and where there is a heavy presence of gun violence or gun deaths?
Yeah, so the Delta, actually, a lot of counties didn't have such high denial rates. And with community policing, I imagine, and I did talk to a lot of police chiefs in doing this story. If you know your community and you're aware of, what's going on in terms of where the crime is happening, what's contributing to that crime, you have a better understanding of just what victims are going through. You might not judge victims so harshly as innocent or not. Again, because a lot of these metrics are subjective. Did they anticipate that there would be people who meant them harm? These are details that can go either way. And I talked to a couple district attorneys and victim service coordinators who work in DA's offices. I mean, these are really important people that the general public might not know about. But victim service coordinators, they work in every DA's office. Their primary job is to make sure that witnesses and victims in court cases show up to testify. But another thing that they do is help victims get resources. So apply for this fund, get any other help that they may need. And I was able to speak to some DAs who actually appealed some of these denials for victims that had come to them. And what they told me was that even them as a district attorney appealing this to the attorney general, they were denied. One person, who I think was a week out from being out of that limit. So basically, if you have a prior felony in the last 5 years, and again, it's judged based on the last day of your probation or drug treatment program, you don't qualify. So this person was 1 week out of 5 years from the last day of a drug treatment program they were in for a felony conviction that happened or drug conviction that happened even further in the past. And the DA applied on their behalf and said, please, give them this fund. They do not have the money to pay for a burial, and they were denied even just a week out, from being out of the statutory limit. And again, these are victims of crime that we're talking about here. Yeah.
Man, what's alarming to me is that we make it so difficult for victims, right? We make it so extremely tough. But Leo, I want to go to another point. You and I talked about this on the phone the other day, and you've mentioned it here, but not necessarily in detail, as it relates to police involvement and their contribution to the reports, and perhaps even the victims getting the clearance rate, right, or getting an approval rate. What is the role of the police officer in this? What are they filling out? What are they saying? Are they answering detailed questions? Are they providing detailed information, or is it a gloss over for the most part?
They can or they cannot. I've reviewed a number of these forms that police officers fill out in these cases, and sometimes they just check a box. In other cases, they just, they might explain a little bit. There is space provided, to explain, and sometimes they just don't explain. They'll say no, and that'll be the end of it. And when I talk to law enforcement and I said, when you're making these decisions, what are you considering? How do you know if someone contributed to their own death? There are the obvious examples. The rule was put into place basically because, if you're robbing a store and the store owner shoots you, you shouldn't, get money to help pay for your funeral in that case. That makes a little bit more sense than denying someone because they, should have known that there would be people who meant them harm somewhere, or they use fighting words, or or they weren't a prudent person. Again, law enforcement have different rationale depending on who they are. At the moment, one person I spoke to said, well, I only check the box if they brought the fight to someone else. That was the phrase that was used to me by one law enforcement officer. Another person said, well, if they are robbing a store, and gave just like a couple specific examples, then I don't give it, or I don't check the box. So again, it really depends on law enforcement. And yes, there is a form that is sent to them that they fill out, and they send it back to the AG's office.
That's kind of unfortunate that is that broad and not more specific. Greg says it's probably easier to deny than to properly administrate. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, if it's one person who's not making a ton of money, I mean, you could look up the salaries of a lot of these employees. Again, I can understand you're not being paid a lot. You have a lot of these cases to go through. It's important to consider the reality of the bureaucracy. One person for all these cases from across the state, maybe two social workers that help out. You can understand in a way where things might, go wrong in a way. Again, it's a lot on one person. I think is what at least I see just based on the numbers.
Man, absolutely unbelievable. How do I ask this question? In your mind, do you think there's a simpler way for victims to be compensated? Because here's my interpretation. If the victim uses language that they don't agree with, or one word that could promote that they were somehow responsible for this, they can be denied, right? Language plays a big part of this. Do you think there's a simpler process?
Yeah, a lot of states have gotten rid of contributory misconduct. For example, Ohio, New Jersey, Delaware, Louisiana got rid of some stipulations. If you're a victim of gun homicide or any homicide, and you just need help paying for a funeral because you don't have money, a lot of states will give you the funds if you have, financial need. If you need this money, a lot of states got rid of contributory misconduct. Ohio, again, states across the country. A lot of states, that neighbor Mississippi don't consider it as harshly. Don't look at your prior felonies or family prior felonies. Don't scrutinize the behavior of victims to the extent that they are scrutinized here. In terms of just the laws, and again, anyone could look this up, the administrative rules for how you determine whether someone contributed to their own death. Mississippi lists a lot of behavior, and again, these rules can be changed. I think that helping victims of crime is something that there is a lot of bipartisan support for across the country. The VOCA fix law, which was passed in 2021 by Congress, was bipartisan. This is an issue that I think a lot of people across the country can understand. Being a victim of crime, can be disempowering, not just for the victim themselves, but for the entire family. And it could be incredibly financially taxing. I mean, some of these receipts that I look through with a lot of victims, I talked to 7-8 victims for the 2 stories of gun homicide, of domestic violence, of assault. And for a lot of them, that's a pain that's not just financial, but emotional too. Right. And counseling could really help out. In one case, a mother wanted help paying for, or grandmother wanted help paying for counseling for her grandchild who witnessed her dad be murdered. And again, these are costs that in a lot of states that border us and are nearby us are covered and are easier to access. In Texas, there was a mother who I spoke to who applied for this fund in Texas when she lived in Texas and then here. And the way she described it was just night and day, at least in her words. Was just, there was more local support. Again, there were more victim service coordinators in the courthouse that could help her make her statement in the courthouse. There was just better funding. And again, this is a decision made on the part of the legislature. The legislature funds a lot of these victim service coordinator roles. Every year, you'll see the legislature vote whether to add another victim service coordinator in a district that needs it. And in some cases, these individuals are very helpful for families, and in clearing crime rates. I spoke to one district attorney in my article who said, when we help out victims, they're more likely to show up in court. They're more likely to help out their prosecution, their investigation. It just works out better for them in the end.
I can absolutely imagine that. I can absolutely imagine that. In your mind, do you think the Victims Crime Unit Fund is going to totally go away here in Mississippi?
I mean, I think it's hard to say, but again, just over the past couple of years, where they're at least just based on the budget documents that are released every year, more in the direction of budgeting for indirect aid versus direct aid. It's definitely been increasing, more indirect aid towards nonprofits than direct aid. So just based on that pattern, I think it's fair to say it could.
Wow. Yeah, someone needs to sound the alarm to Mr. White, right? He needs to look. He needs to look into this, like seriously. Leo, man, I really appreciate your hard work. This information is absolutely powerful and invaluable to the state. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. What's next in this series of stories for you?
Yeah, so right now I'm actually looking at more juvenile justice. I think that in Hinds County, in other counties, we all have juvenile detention centers where we send the youngest offenders in the county to help them get on a better track. But unfortunately, that doesn't always turn out to be the case. So I can't share too many details, as I'm still kind of going through documents and interviewing people who've been through the juvenile detention system in Hinds County. But it's something that that I'm currently working on, and happy to share more details as I'm able to verify them.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your work. You've given us some great information tonight, and really cleared up some things in my mind. So, Leo, thank you, brother. I appreciate that. I am excited that we were able to connect, and I look to stay in touch with you.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much. That's Leo from the Mississippi Today, our reporter there at Mississippi Today. And if you have not had an opportunity to check out his articles, you need to go over to Mississippi Today's website, and you can find it all there. You are absolutely right. You are absolutely right about that. Juvenile detention centers here are stepping stones to MDOC. You're absolutely right. So thank you for lifting that. Listen, I hope you were informed. This to me was the prelude of my really talking to these Black nonprofits about being wrongfully wrongfully publicly scrutinized, right? The more I dig, the more I realize that the auditor did not say they did anything wrong. He just painted with a broad stroke, with a very racist brush, to give the appearance of wrongdoing, right? To give the illusion, to create speculation. That's what he did. That's what he did. And I think it's extremely unfair. And so I wanted to use the platform tonight to show that there are other nonprofits, that are non-Black, that he should look into, right? Check them out. Check them out. Even Governor Tate Reeves, as Leo alluded to, vetoed that human trafficking funding the last legislative session. Human trafficking is I guess a sexy term, and it's problematic. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. It is absolutely problematic. But for us, it seems like our AG is funneling monies there, and again, giving them to nonprofits. In a lot of cases, they are just offer referral services. And as a victim of crime, direct support is far better than indirect support. Because he raised a question that places doubt in the validity and integrity of those businesses. Absolutely, absolutely did, absolutely, and unfairly, unnecessarily, he did that. Right? He absolutely did that. Yeah. Talk to me about that, Greg. That was a way to get bread. You got that right. You absolutely got that right. It's interesting. I'm switching subjects just a little bit. Well, no, that I'll save that for Dr. J. I'll talk to her about that. I was gonna respond to a previous show. Somebody thought that I blocked them, and I didn't block them. I was like, "You saw the video, but I didn't block you." But I'm looking at this streaming note here, Dr. J, that I want to talk to you about later. Anyway, I think Chad White did damage to some reputations, even though he did not accuse them of doing anything wrong. He just raised a level of doubt. He raised a level of suspicion. But I'm so excited, and I'm going to have an opportunity to talk to Dr. June Gibson, Dr. Juanita Sims Doty, and Dr. Marvell Turner, the three heads of those nonprofits that he lifted up. We're going to get in one room and we're going to talk about it. We're going to bring that to you. I'm excited about that upcoming conversation. Hey, listen, guys, thank you for being here. We certainly do appreciate your input. We appreciate your time. Don't forget to please support us. That's the only way we can continue to bring you stories. But we're back on track. You can donate to us at Cash App, $Othor Cain. But we're back on track. Getting back last week was just crazy busy for me and Dr. J, and so it feels like that I hadn't been here in forever. But thank you so much. We really do appreciate you, all that you do. Listen, I want him on, Greg. I have not reached out yet, but I want him on. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate you, brother. I want him on. I haven't reached out yet, but I am, especially after I have the conversation with Dr. Gibson, Dr. Doty, and Dr. Marvell Turner. We're going to certainly reach out to him and give him an opportunity to respond. Cross my fingers, but I have my thoughts, right? Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again.